Hey guys, today I'm back in Polybridge, and I want to try breaking the game a bit by making a boat. Now this definitely isn't intended, so it's going to be tricky trying to get it working. So, let's get right into it. So I'm just starting out in the sandbox here, and the first thing I'm doing is moving the islands further apart, just to give me a little bit more water to play with. And after that, you see here I'm building up some steel pieces, and the idea of this is I'm going to make a wheel that's just surrounded by roads on the outside, and I want to make this my main power source. Now you see I'm putting a monster truck on here, and as the truck drives, it should spin around this wheel, and I can use that rotation to power whatever I need. Now this ends up being a really convenient way to make a powered wheel since it's easy to move around and it's pretty stable overall. And you can see here just finishing it up, it doesn't really work. The truck just escapes, and it's because all the springs broke and I forgot to turn on unbreakable mode. So after I did that, I also messed around with some extra steel pieces and some extra roads just to hold it in a bit better, and you can see here I finally get what I want. It mostly works. It's getting held to the wheel, but it's just really spinning around, and you can see there it looks kind of funny. So to fix that, you see here I'm putting down another static joint, and once I do that, I just hold the truck basically on the top, and after that, you can see it's spinning up the wheel just fine, and I should be able to use this as a power source. After I had that done, you can see here I put in a square in the middle of this wheel, and that's so I could hook up a 4-bar linkage and transfer that rotation down to these two squares. Now you see one of them is slightly in the water, and the idea here is that I can get the rotation transferred further down without having the big wheel and truck in the way. And now giving it a test, you can see as it spins up, it actually comes out of the water here, which was looking pretty good. I figured with this design, I might actually be able to get somewhere. Now I wasn't really sure why it was coming out of the water, because there wasn't any paddles or anything, and once I added those on, it actually seemed to be doing a lot better. But I thought about it a little bit more, and this doesn't actually make any sense. The way these paddles are set up, they're actually reversed right now, and they're pushing up more than they're pushing down. So if anything, they actually should be pulling themselves into the water a little bit. And I ended up making this effect a little more extreme here at these paddles, but it also seemed to come out of the water. And also I tried paddles that were actually the correct direction, and they also seemed to work, and in fact, they seemed to work best. But I was a little confused on exactly how these paddles were working, but they at least seemed to be working here, so I decided just to roll with it for now. And what I wanted to do was just drive this entire mechanism into the water. So to do that, you see I'm putting down some paddles on the edge of this big wheel, but I realized I can't just put roads around the edge of the wheel like that, so I ended up deleting them, and I was going to put down 2 wheels on the bottom of this one, and all I wanted to do is just put paddles on the outside of these. I'm going to transfer the rotation with the same 4-bar linkages as before. And after cleaning these up a little bit, you see here I'm putting down the paddles on the outside, and I just copied it over to the other wheel as well. And once I do that, the next thing to do is use 4 cables to make sure that the rotation from the top wheel gets carried to the bottom ones. And after I put all those cables in place, the next thing I'm doing is linking them all together with steel. This is that the whole thing is just one rigid structure and all the wheels don't just go everywhere. So I just hook those all up like that, and you can see here in this test, it seems to be working reasonably well, but I actually forgot one thing. I need to get rid of this anchor node at the top of the truck here, and I need to attach it to everything else. If I don't do that, it's just gonna hold everything up in the air and not really be that useful. So I hooked it up like this, and you can see now it's wobbling back and forth a little bit, but that's actually good here because that means it's totally free. So I added in an extra hydraulic phase like this, and you also saw I added in another static joint. I'm gonna set this hydraulic phase to have a 20-second delay. What this means is that after 20 seconds, this whole thing is gonna drop into the water, and that's basically just to allow it to gain enough speed so that I don't just drop it in before it gets any momentum at all. So I really refined this design, and this is about the best I could get it. It's pretty light, but it falls into the water and just doesn't go anywhere at all. And this is when I realized paddles aren't going to work at all here. The problem with paddles is that this game doesn't really consider any fluid dynamics. So instead of caring about how much water I'm pushing down or pushing up, all it cares about is that there's an object moving through the water and it produces a force going in the opposite direction opposing that, meaning there's no meaningful way to actually get lift using this sort of design. But it did get me thinking, what if instead of trying to use different angles to push water in different ways, what if I try using different speeds? Basically what I'm relying on here is using a motor like this, and you can see once I get it up to speed, it's not too bad. But I can use this, and if I create some linkage to push down faster than it pulls up, I might be able to get somewhere. And you can see this linkage right here. As it pulls up, it's pretty slow, but it snaps down into place, and I'm hoping to use this quick jerk down to give me a bunch of thrust up. And as it comes back up, I'm hoping it gives less power. But you can see here, I'm trying to hook it up to some different engines, and it's just not powerful enough. It ends up breaking this first one, and this one here, while it looks cool, it's really unstable, and it vibrates too much to really be useful at all. Now still messing around with this design though, I noticed something interesting. This game doesn't check for invalid inputs, so you could just type in things like not a number, and you get this result. The nodes are literally like warping out of the shape right now because it's going so fast. And when I try to set up the same linkage from before, it completely just disintegrates because it can't even hold itself together. And I was curious what else I could do with this, so I spawned in a limo and gave it not a number speed, and when it falls on the ground, it literally goes backwards. So interesting. And I had to mess with this more because it was so interesting. When you set the shocks multiplier to not a number, it just vanishes. I have no idea where this goes. I think it gets a ridiculous amount of downward speed, and you can see here it ends up splashing the water beneath it, so I have no idea what's happening there, but I thought that was kind of funny, so I had to show it. Now, with neither of those other solutions working, I was pretty disheartened, but someone showed me this glitch on my Discord server, and I gotta give full credit for Arglin for this one, because if you look here, for some reason, if you surround the node with a bunch of steel pieces, replace one of those steel pieces with a hydraulic, and then surround that with roads, it does this. No one knows why it does this, but it does this. Now, if I turn on stress visibility here, you can see there's some interesting things happening. The steel is actually compressing and expanding, and it's putting a lot of stress on everything, as you could probably imagine. And for whatever reason, this makes it fly. And you can attach a couple of these together, though every time you attach something to one of these nodes, it gets a little more locked together, and it doesn't really want to move as freely. Now, you see here, it was sort of hovering on the water for a bit before the hydraulics pulled in, and that ended up totally killing the motion. But it was kind of okay before that point, and I wanted to add 4 of these together and just see how that would do, and it ended up being way worse. This was sinking fast, and it was definitely not going to come back up. So what I ended up deciding to do is just put down some small joints in the bottom like this, and after that, I just want to attach the top and bottom of these together as well. Now, I'm not trying to attach a lot of them on the same spot, and instead, the way I have it set up here is that the sides are pretty free to move, and with that, it actually was holding it all together, and it wasn't that bad. So I ended up adding some weights to this, hoping to keep it further in the water, and it sort of seemed to slow it down, but the roads also were just spinning around like crazy. So I added more roads on, hoping that would dampen that movement a bit, but they all just started spinning like this, and it looked pretty bad. So I added on a massive road chain, because there's no way I was going to spin that. And you see here, it actually was trying to, but it wasn't succeeding that much. But also, it's not even weighing it down. So I added on some extra cables, hopefully pull in the movement a bit. And finally here, you can see it's actually sinking slowly, but also the roads are now pointing straight up in the air. This whole thing is really weird. So I just gave it a bit more room, and after it fell down into the water, you'll actually notice it was floating on it. All I can imagine here is that as it bounces up and down, the resistance the water gives is preventing it from going too far in, and it wants to stay right on the surface. Now you'll see here I added on some extra weights, and it drops further into the water, and it actually is able to pull itself out of the water a bit and then just float on it. But I ended up adding on an extra road here just to see what would happen. And first of all, it's pointing straight out, which is quite bizarre, and also it's adding extra thrust. This whole thing is really weird, but to increase the stability and hopefully make it work a little bit better, what I wanted to do is make it wider. This design I was hoping would reduce the amount of rotation I was getting, and this did not help at all. In fact, it seemed to make it worse. You see the joints in the middle are bending badly, and the back wheel is pulling out way further than the front wheel. So I ended up shortening it again, and you see here what I'm trying to do now is add on the carriers to hold the cars. And this was quite difficult because there's so much vibration here that holding on a car is going to be basically impossible. So I tried adding on some extra weights and putting some springs in to help it, but look at this front one. It's just going so fast, nothing's going to stay on that. And even here, I'm adding on more and more weights, and it's not holding it in the water. It seems like weights will pull it down. You see here, I put down enough where it finally pulls it in, but messing with the mechanism itself that makes it fly is a much more efficient way to make it move up or down. Now I ended up going crazy with the roads here, and I was hoping with just a bunch of extra springs and roads, it'd hopefully weigh it down enough and give it enough of suspension where it wouldn't really want to vibrate too badly. And it was better here. It seemed to be sort of working. We also noticed it's still coming out of the water a lot, and it's not really doing too well. After a whole bunch of attempts at tuning different roads, moving them around a bit, finally here I got something that sort of looked okay, and it was approaching the land pretty well. Now the roadway was still vibrating a lot though, so I was a little concerned about that, but I ended up deciding here to just mess around with the boat shape and get something that looked decent. After I got that steel structure put in place here, you can see it's okay, but for some reason adding all that extra steel made it want to go into the air. And also I realized my boat design is pretty bad here because I want this boat to be able to go in both directions. Because my plan on this is to ferry a car over to one side and then back over. And if I want to do that, I wanted the boat design to be somewhat convincing, so it needs to be roughly symmetrical. And you see here, I got this sort of canoeish looking design. And once I did that, the next thing I wanted to work on was some way to get the boat to go to the right. This was ridiculously hard for some reason. And you see here, I am slowly going over to the right, but I'm also falling in. And I tried moving around some roads to give me a bit more leverage, but this seemed to make it worse, and it just instantly flipped over. And after quite a while, I ended up finding out putting a single hydraulic on the outside wheel strongly affects the way that it vibrates. And you see, after I put one of those in place on the right wheel as well, it's almost staying perfectly still in the water. This is awesome because it means that with just a little bit of biasing, I should be able to get it over to the right. Now I added on some extra weights to hopefully tip it over to the right, but this seemed to make it later for some reason. and also start to go over to the left. So my next plan is to put in a Vespa like this, and originally I was putting this in just so that I could test out ferrying it and figuring out exactly how much weight it had and what effect that had on moving this. And you see, my structure wasn't that great for holding it, but it started to make it move over to the right. And after adding in a checkpoint that I could hit, I ended up doubling the amount of roads I had here to hold it in place, and messed around with the roads a ton to hopefully keep it in the water. And finally here you can see it's sitting on the water reasonably well, and it's actually moving over to the right. And this is great, because if I had the design from before to move it over to the left, if I just drop all of my extra roads, and if I just expand out all of the extra hydraulics, I should start moving over to the left. And I ended up changing out my chain of roads here for just a big road block, and this looks a little bit better in my opinion. It's not just dragging in the water, and it seems to function in basically the same way. So with that done, once again, time to actually start messing with the design, and I guess I was going for a kind of canoe-like thing here. And you see, after I put that all in place like this, it seems to be staying in the water reasonably well, and it's starting to move over to the right. With the movement system working great, the next thing I wanted to work on is a carrier to hold the cars. Now this is hard because it's vibrating so much, but I realized that if I put them on the very outsides of the wheel like this, it isn't too bad. It's vibrating a little bit, but that seems perfectly fine for a car to sit on. So I ended up spawning in a sports car here and just giving it a shot to see how it would work. Now I ended up using my not a number glitch to just keep it fixed in the air like this, because if you set the mass to not a number, it just stays in place. And after getting the position right with that, I ended up giving it some real mass, and with that, it looked pretty good, and I was worried it wasn't going to go in time, but eventually it just fell right on this thing and seemed to hold on to it very well. And you can see it start moving to the right again. So with that done, I ended up setting the width between the two islands to exactly 100 meters because I thought it's a very nice number. And I ended up moving some platforms over to the other side as well so I could bring a car back. Now you'll notice I'm putting in a van, and I actually replaced the car on the other side of the van because I think the van's a little more visible and I like the look of it a little bit better. But you can see here moving over to the one side and actually moves over to the left a lot faster than the right. I noticed a couple problems. You notice it just sinks here. Now I ended up fixing that and a few other problems I had, and while I was at it, I also added on a few other fun things to the level. You see here I'm making a little scoop. This grabs up the first van once it comes across so that it ends up getting out of the way. And you see I put in a couple of hot air balloons to hold up that whole mechanism. Finally here you can see I also added a sail to the boat, and with that, it was all done. So with everything done, here's the full level. So guys, thanks for watching. I've wanted to make this video for literally like a year and a half now, and only now I've actually got everything together to finally make it happen. So if you liked the video, make sure to subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. If you have any other suggestions of what I should make sure to leave that down below too. And otherwise, until next time.